This is the 2023 Tyre Reviews winter tyre test. If you've seen any of my tyre tests before, you'll know exactly what to expect. I'm testing 11 of the newest and greatest ultra high performance winter tyres in a 225/45 18-inch size on a BMW 3 Series, and I'll be testing them as thoroughly as possible, including dry, wet, and of course snow testing, and we'll also be looking at the rolling resistance and comfort of the tyres and the noise levels to find out exactly which of these 11 tyres is best for you. Not only are we testing these 11 tyres, I'm also testing an all-season and a summer tyre in this test, so we can see just how good a summer tyre is in the dry, just how bad it is in the snow, and where an all-season tyre fits into the bigger picture. Should be a really exciting test, so let's get on with the testing. The two slowest tyres on test were the only two asymmetric patterns. A coincidence? I don't think so. Will this repay in dry and wet? We'll find out in a bit. They were the Falcon and the Budget Leo. I'm going to call it Leo, but just excuse me if that's wrong. Now, the Falcon noticeably had the most understeer of all the tyres, and that is when you're trying to get the tyre into the corner, the car just wouldn't turn. So that means you had to be so delicate on the way in, and it was a bit of a frustrating experience, and that left it about 7% down on the best. The Budget tyre was a little bit more balanced front and rear, but what it didn't give you was any feedback whatsoever through the steering wheel or through your butt to tell you when you're at the limit of the grip. And a good tyre should give you confidence to push on by being communicative, and that's where the Budget fell down. The next pair of tyres was the GT and Continental. Both of these tyres had good grip. It was just a little bit peaky, and by peaky what I mean is as you got to the limit of grip, as you'd start to slide, it would happen a bit quickly and you'd have to maybe try and catch it, maybe get on the brakes to neutralise some understeer or get some opposite lock on to catch the oversteer. Now, we're talking small margins, but this is what happens in tyre tests. You look for the small margins, and that was the characteristics of those two tyres. Kumho, Bridgestone and Redstone were next, all just 0.5% apart from each other, so very, very close. The Kumho, like the previous two tyres, was a tiny bit peaky, whereas the Bridgestone loved a bit of understeer. The Redstone Windtrack Pro, now as you know, if you're a regular viewer to the channel, I do test blind, so I don't know what I'm testing on as I'm driving. And in last year's test, in a different size and a different car, the Redstone Windtrack Pro wasn't the best in snow, and it wasn't my favourite. But in this test, particularly strong. I don't know if it's been a midlife update or maybe the snow conditions just suit it a little bit better, so constant progression is excellent. The final group of tyres was Hankook, Pirelli and Goodyear. Now, all three of these tyres were excellent. They all had strong turning, good mid-corner grip, good traction out the corners, and felt great on the brake. So all three of these are excellent winter tyres. Which was my favourite to drive? It was the Hankook. The other two, they were excellent, but like some previous tyres, they were just a little bit more peaky at and past the limit. Whereas the Hankook, I really enjoyed it as a winter tyre last year in a different size on a different platform. So now I'm very happy that I can report I'm really enjoying it again. It just gave you confidence to really do what you wanted, and of the tyres, it probably gave you the most feedback through the steering. Fabulous winter tyre by Hankook, and consistent obviously across the sizes. Finally, the astute of you might have noticed there is a space at the top of the scoreboard. Can you guess which tyre fills it? You're probably right if you know about tyres. It is once again the Michelin Pilot Alpine 5. Now, the French manufacturer seems to do something very special with the Pilot Alpine range, and once again this tyre was just outstanding, almost in a class of its own. Slightly ahead of the Hankook in terms of subjective handling. It did everything the Hankook does, and then just gave you that little bit more grip, so that gave you a bit more confidence to push on. Oh, joyful tyre to drive. The Michelin and the Hankook were my favourites for sure, but the Goodyear and Pirelli were excellent. In fact, they were all pretty good. What about the all-season tyre? The all-season tyre I'm using is the Hankook Kinergy 4S2. Now, as you know from my all-season tyre test last year, if you've watched it, this is a very good all-season tyre, but isn't the best all-season tyre in snow perhaps. Yet it slots in at 7th, and in this group of tyres on this BMW, it felt every bit as good as some of the winter tyres. So, impressive job for this all-season tyre. It's going to make the end of this video a little bit confusing if it slots in with the winter tyres in every test, but in theory it'll do better in the dry and wet. The summer tyre, now the summer tyre, it's a summer tyre in snow. I'm not sure what you're expecting me to say. It was only about 45% slower, but subjectively it felt much worse than that. You really had to tiptoe around the lap. Everything you did was a little bit terrifying, and traction especially. There's a very small hill here, and traction especially, you were really worried about getting up. So let's see how it does and all the other tyres do in traction and braking. As in snow handling, the Michelin had the best snow traction, with the Hankook and Goodyear in second and third places. The summer tyre was naturally awful, and the all-season tyre an impressive mid-pack result. It was a similar trend for snow braking, except for the Hankook jumped the Michelin for the win, and the Bridgestone edged out the Goodyear to take third place. The Falcon was sadly the worst winter tyre in both tests, and again in snow braking, the all-season tyre finished in 7th place overall. If you've already seen my all-season test this year, you'll know what I'm about to say. Due to the test facility used for dry and wet testing this year having restrictions on filming, I'm going to talk about the dry and wet performance of the tyres here. The fastest around the wet lap also had the best wet braking, and you won't be surprised to know it as the Bridgestone Blizzak LM005. This tyre always performs well in the wet, and once again it was outstanding in the grip test, even if it was a little bit mid-pack for aquaplaning. The Michelin Pilot Alpine 5 and Continental Winter Contact TS870P were also very impressive in both wet braking and wet handling, and like the Bridgestone, neither was particularly strong in the deeper water of aquaplaning. Hankook, Goodyear and Pirelli were also great tyres in the wet, with the Pirelli managing to be fast around the wet lap and having the best aquaplaning resistance of all the winter tyres, which is a nice combination to have. The Falcon was also good around the lap and had great aquaplaning resistance, but couldn't quite stop the car as well as the best in the test. The GT was great to drive subjectively and had excellent aquaplaning resistance, but it did lack a little bit of grip at the limit in braking and handling, and the Redstein and Kumho finished down the order. Not bad tyres, this is just a very tough group of tyres. The budget tyre, the Leo, well, this was bad, possibly highlighted more by the fact we're using a rear-wheel drive platform, but it was really tricky to get around the lap and was another 10% worse than the 12th place tyre in wet braking, which is over a car length in distance. You know me and cheap tyres, don't. TWDR, the best winter tyre in the wet is the Bridgestone. Unless the water's deep, then it's the Pirelli. But the Michelin and the Continental are also excellent, and the Goodyear and Hankook are also no slouches, good choices. As I talked about in my all-season test, the siphoning required on winter tyres makes braking very difficult, which means the summer tyre was way ahead of the group during wet braking, and it was also very fast around the wet handling lap. It also had the best aquaplaning resistance by a clear margin. A good reminder to take off your winter tyres once the colder months have passed. Don't be tempted to run on them year round. Summer tyres are great at what they're meant to do. The all-season tyre was pipped by the amazing Bridgestone in wet braking, and as we saw in the all-season test, the Hankook all-season tyre didn't quite like the deeper parts of the wet handling lap, as it doesn't have the best aquaplaning resistance, so it wasn't the fastest of the group around the lap. Dry braking is even harder than wet braking for winter tyres, as the forces are higher, so once again the summer tyre had a significant margin, this time over 16% better than the best winter tyre. Think about this, if you see anyone considering running their winter tyres into the summer, slap them. The best winter tyre in dry braking was the Michelin, with the Continental a close second. Goodyear, GT and Kumho all did well, with the GT and Kumho tying, and the Falcon was a short amount behind. Pirelli, Bridgestone and Hankook, which all did well in wet braking, struggled a little bit in dry braking, and the Redstein and Leo rounded out the dry braking results. Dry handling obviously isn't the top priority for a winter tyre, but it's still an important category. Pretty much all the tyres were fine, with only the Lao being slightly worse of the group. In fact, if you ignore the budget tyre, the Lao, all the other tyres within 1.77% of each other. It was that close in dry handling. The Michelin was the fastest around the lap, shock, but a little bit numb compared to some of the most dynamic, with the Continental, Goodyear, Pirelli and Hankook all being enjoyable to drive. In summary, the Michelin is the best winter tyre overall in the drive, perhaps not the sportiest handling though, and the Continental, Kumho and Goodyear all did very well. As with the all-season test, I didn't have the weather to do objective noise sadly, but two of us did spend quite a lot of time doing subjective noise and comfort on a rather excellent noise and comfort track. There were a bunch of standouts, so if comfort is your thing, you'll be really happy with either the Bridgestone, Michelin, Continental, Goodyear or Falcon, with the Hankook being the best of the rest. With rolling resistance levels of tyres getting ever more important, but often coming at the expense of wet grip, it's rare to find a tyre that does well in both categories, but a few manufacturers seem to have absolutely nailed it in this test. No one more so than Continental, with a near 6% better rolling resistance than the next best winter tyre, which was the Bridgestone, and over 14% better than the third place tyre. That's ginormous. The budget Lao also did actually do very well in the rolling resistance test. However, in this case, it definitely came at the expense of wet grip, and snow grip, and dry grip, and grip, just, you know. The Pirelli, GT and Falcon are the ones to avoid if you're worried about your fuel bill, all over 15% worse than the Continental, which will translate into a roughly 4% more fuel or energy use. Okay, the final result. As always, you can find the score weighting I've used on screen, and if you don't like it, well, that's absolutely fine, as you can use the link in the description to go to the Tyre Reviews website to adjust the scoring system to work for your own priorities and needs. It's also worth noting before we go through the final order, this was a very stacked group of tyres. Last place was the cheap tyre shock. Its only redeeming quality was its price and the rolling resistance level, but if you're looking for good levels of grip in the dry, wet or snow, maybe it's worth picking another tyre from the results. You know, any of the others would be an improvement. The Falcon Euro Winter HS02 Pro was next. That's a mouthful. Now, this tyre did struggle in the rolling resistance test, having the worst of the group, and wasn't the best in the snow either, but it was obviously much better than the summer tyre. It was good in dry and wet handling and had great aquaplaning resistance, so perhaps it's not a bad winter tyre for somewhere like the UK that doesn't see that much snow. I would like to see better wet braking in the future revision of this tyre though. Kumho Wintercraft WP52 had a similar performance overall to the Falcon, but it was a little bit better in the snow and had slightly better rolling resistance, but it couldn't quite match the Falcon in wet handling, tit for tat between the two brands. The Vredstein Windtrack Pro had a good snow performance overall, a low rolling resistance, but did struggle more in the dry than previous two tyres. The Vredstein Windtrack Pro has been on the market for quite a long time now, but it's impressive it's still up here. It must have had a lot of midlife updates, and maybe if there's an update in the future, it will just keep on moving up the order. The GT Wintersport S2 narrowly beat the Vredstein to 7th place overall. It was a really fun tyre to drive, especially in the dry, and had excellent aquaplaning resistance. Its only drawbacks were higher rolling resistance and a reduced levels of comfort, but otherwise a very solid tyre. The Pirelli Cintrato Winter 2 was actually a similar tyre to the GT. It was another fun tyre to drive with its best aquaplaning resistance on test, but sadly, like the GT, its rolling resistance was amongst the highest of the group. It did, however, have more grip in the snow and the wet than the GT, hence finishing a place higher. The new Goodyear Ultra Grip Performance 3 and Hankook Winter Icept Evo 3 drew in 4th. The Ultra Grip Performance 3 followed the usual Goodyear DNA of minimal compromises, scoring very well in almost every category. Unusually, the odd one out was rolling resistance. Goodyear's normally very good in this, but the tyre did have one of the best subjective noise and comfort levels on test. The Hankook Winter Icept Evo 3 was one of the best tyres in the snow, which is obviously a very important quality for a winter tyre. It had great grip in the wet with good aquaplaning resistance. However, it did lose out a little bit in the dry with a 9th place dry braking result. It was, however, only 5% off the best in dry braking, so not that far. A solid winter tyre. Third place went to the impressive Continental Winter Contact TS870P, which is the tyre to buy definitely if you drive an EV or you want to save fuel, as it had by far the lowest rolling resistance on test. It also somehow blended all of that with one of the best performances in the dry and excellent grip in the wet. It was a little bit weaker in the snow than the best tyre on test, but it was only 4% off the best in snow braking and handling, so again, not a huge gap. Impressive tyre, especially when you stop and think about its rolling resistance levels. If you know winter tyres, you won't be surprised at the final two tyres, but you may be surprised that they all but tied for the win, but with different characteristics. The Bridgestone Blizzak LM005 was again an awesome tyre. It was the only tyre that could get close to the Continental's rolling resistance levels and was the best tyre in the wet and one of the best tyres in the snow with excellent noise and comfort. It wasn't the best in the dry, but as it finished so well in almost every other category, the LM005 is proving to still be one of the best winter tyres on the market. Very impressive. Technically, the Michelin Pilot Alpine 5 did pip the Bridgestone, but it was such a tiny margin, I'm calling them both test winners. The Michelin was almost untouchable in the snow, especially snow handling, and was completely untouchable in the dry and one of the best in the wet. It didn't quite have the rolling resistance of the Bridgestone, where it finished nearly 10% behind, but in every other single category, this tyre's performance was outstanding. A hugely impressive tyre, and huge congratulations to Michelin and of course Bridgestone. So that's it. Let me know which winter tyre you're going to fit. Go and review your summer tyres you're taking off over at tyre-reviews.com. There's a huge amount of good winter content coming to the channel, so be sure to like and subscribe. Any questions, please ask below, and as always, safe motoring.